Hello, everyone. I'm Leanne. I'm a relationship therapist in Houston, Texas, and I am here today to talk about divorce and when we should consider divorce and why, for so long, I used to think divorce was such a dirty word. I'm from a family lineage of people who stayed married for many, many years. My grandparents, as a young child, I was at their 50th wedding anniversary. So my grandparents were together for a long time on one side. On the other side, my grandparents were married until death do part. So I was from a family where we stay married. Like that is, and my cousins stay married. Like everyone stays married. And so when I got into marriage, this felt like an obvious thing that I was never going to get divorced and I was always going to stay married and that was the goal and that staying married was the gold standard of marriage. And so I just thought divorce was a dirty word. When people would talk about in their marriages getting divorced, I was like, I remember a friend was getting married. She's like, well, it'll last, forever until it doesn't. I was like, you can't say that. Don't talk about divorce. And so I feel like I'm not alone in this idea of two things. One, divorce is a dirty word and that should not be brought up in the context of a healthy marriage. Divorce usually gets brought up in like a fight or things blowing up. And if we hear that as outsiders, we're like, oh, what are they talking? Why would they talk about it like that? So divorce is kind of seen as a dirty word. And I also think that we still gauge the success of a marriage on the longevity of the marriage. And so throwing my grandparents' dirty laundry out there, it's okay that their marriages, neither of them were healthy marriages. Because now, as a relationship therapist, I can look back on my grandparents on each side and see that these were not actually healthy marriages, but they were successful marriages because they lasted until they died. So, successful marriage means that the marriage outlives the people in them. And an unsuccessful marriage is one that ends before. Now, I have been a therapist for over a decade. I have worked with many people, individuals and couples, and I still maintain for a long time this kind of two-sided thoughts about it. One, that like some people, the marriages really weren't healthy and that they were not the healthiest situations, and I did think they should probably end. But then this kind of fantasy growing up loyalty to like, but it's marriage and it needs to last forever. And so I was always kind of split in the middle. And I remember a colleague said to me that she had been to a relationship therapist and that the whole time that therapist was so set on saving that marriage, and it actually overlooked the fact that the marriage was not a healthy marriage for them to be in. And that really stuck with me. So that was before I was even doing relationship therapy. That feedback kind of started to put a little hole in my head of like, wait, is it always best practice to never question the marriage? Because it kind of felt to me like if you're going to a marriage counselor as a couple, the assumption needs to be that this is something that needs to be safe. And then in my own marriage, I had a moment where I was wondering what I wanted to do. And I, in my mind, considered divorce, which I was not allowed to do. And I let myself go there. And I am not saying this advice is not for everyone, but I want to share it because we need to be more candid about divorce. We need this to be a bigger part of the conversation because this is a big thing. This is very common. Half of marriages are ending in divorce. This is not something that's such an anomaly that we shouldn't speak of it. It's not something that not speaking of it fixes because clearly that's not happening. And I actually think that for me, at least in my story, it was way more helpful to consider divorce than to keep pretending that divorce didn't exist. And it was so healing to step into that imaginative scenario and go forward with it versus kind of unconsciously holding it in the back of my mind. And I will tell you why. So, in my own story, there was a place where I felt like my marriage was not equal. I was not getting out of it what I wanted to get out of it. And I felt like my partner was not meeting me in the way that I wanted to be met in the marriage. So I said, maybe I'm done with this marriage. And I went so far as to tell my family about this. I didn't say this was happening, but I said, I'm considering this. There was a really intentional reason I did that. I didn't do that to throw my husband under the bus. I didn't do that to get them on my side. What I needed to do for me was I felt like I was held in place by this invisible force field where I'm not allowed to not be married. I felt like once I was married, I had to stay married. And my mom and my sister would be so disappointed that if I were to not stay married, they couldn't handle it. And so I realized like part of what was holding me in place was my family. My family of origin was kind of holding me in place. And I see that a lot. I think all of us in our marriages are held in place by our own ego's view of ourselves. And the thought of rupturing other people's view of us keeps us in situations that are not healthy. And so the first thing I needed to do was I needed to tell my family for me that this might be something I'm considering. Again, this is not a recommendation for everyone, but the point is I needed to remove the barrier so that I could honestly consider it without my ego instantly kicking it back. So I told my family about this and I really let myself walk it out. I let myself consider it. I let myself imagine these two realities. I gave myself the freedom because I met my husband in my 20s. So 20 something Leanne had one view, and now I'm in my 30s, and 30 something Leanne has a different view. And I allowed myself to consider, do I want to be in this marriage? And I had never given myself the freedom to consider that before. And I let myself consider it and I walked through it. And ultimately, I decided that I wanted to stay in my marriage. And my husband shifted some. But what happened was by me allowing myself to consider it, allowing myself to put out there all the things I was unhappy with for myself, allowing myself to think about what my life would be without it, paradoxically, I appreciate it more because the universe, God had a plan for me because I decided, okay, I'm not getting the support I need. I'm not feeling the way I want to feel. Maybe I'm better off alone. Then my husband just coincidentally had a business trip out of town for like a week. And I was sobered in my beliefs. And I was like, no, I'm actually better as a partnership. And I actually, miss my husband because he is my best friend, but also I miss having help here and I can't do this alone all the time. But really walking through it, I'm not saying that this is the outcome for everyone. And I'm not saying this is a thing you do to strengthen your marriage. I'm saying that there's a freedom in allowing ourselves to decide, to come to a place where we are deciding, is this for me or not? And because what I will tell you is when I recommitted to my marriage, again, a lot more appreciation came with me than how I'd previously felt. I had a fantasy if I weren't married, and a reality I am married, and walking out the fantasy brought a little bit of reality to it where I was like, I actually don't like that route. But it was through this process of allowing myself to choose that I allowed myself to move forward in a different way. And what I find a lot with couples is if you're not willing to consider divorce, A, there's no fuel to change. Why would anyone change? If we're going to just continue this until we die, why would I change? I should bring my husband onto this episode. I do think that shifted him. The fact that I was honest and not hysterical, not angry, just clear that I didn't want to keep living like this, I think that allowed him to get clarity of, does he want to change and evolve and do this marriage differently and find something that works for us? Or does he want to be alone? And if he's not willing to do the work to change, maybe we're better alone. And so by allowing this to actually be on the table in the beginning and not waiting till the end where we're angry and bitter and mad at each other, when we're allowing it to be there in the beginning, and I'm not saying in the beginning of marriage, but in the beginning of that moment where you're like, I don't know, if you're able to let that be there, it gives a reason to do the work or clarity that they're not going to do the work. So I think it's actually imperative for doing the work in a relationship to let this be an option. And Dr. Shafali says it so perfectly. And this is another thing that changed my mind around success in marriage is that we are determining success of a marriage based on longevity of a marriage. And really the marker of success in a marriage should be the growth of the people in the marriage. And when there is no longer growth in a marriage, If we're looking at it from a longevity model, it doesn't matter if there's growth or not. As long as we hang in there, we're doing the work because the work is hanging on. It reminds me of like a mutton busting where there's like little kids holding on to these little sheep, like running, like just hold on. There's no real technique. You just got to get to the end versus like you could tell it's Houston rodeo season versus like a rodeo where there's skill and you're practicing and training and really learning how to compete in this way. And so if we're looking for longevity, the thing becomes just don't let go. But if we're looking at a measure of success in marriages as growth, is this person growing? Is their relationship growing? Is it evolving? Are we able to meet each other in each season of life in a different way? Are we willing to keep shedding our expectations and shedding how we think it should be and keep meeting each other in this new place, in this new way and growing together? Then longevity is no longer the marker, it's the growth. And I'm not saying there's periods where we will not stagnate in things, but are we as a couple willing to come together and keep growing and learning, or are we no longer willing to grow in our partnership? And so really shifting our mindset of A, letting ourselves consider it and talk about it because most of us are considering it in our minds and never actually speaking it to our partners. And how I was thinking, oh, it's better if you never talk about it, if you never think about it, and if you never say it. That doesn't actually prevent it from happening. And that doesn't actually prevent it from being an issue. It just actually prevents it from being a talking point and something that you could discuss in the relationship. And the other thing, really seeing our relationships as a chance for growth and transformation. The other thing, the third thing I'll throw in there is I personally don't think relationships in marriages are something that you're entitled to. I don't think you're entitled to your marriage. For men and women, I think that you need to be good stewards of your marriage and of your relationship. And I think that if you're not actively participating as a member of that relationship, as someone who is working with your partner on growing that relationship, on being there for your partner, on being a good partner, if you're not maturing as a partner, maybe your marriage needs to end because if you're not able to uphold the requirements of a marriage, I don't think we need to give people hall passes. And so that's maybe not the most popular opinion, but when we set longevity and we set it as this is something that you just get, you committed to, you got someone to commit to you, and this is just what it is forever, it sets the wrong expectation and the wrong requirements. And we really want to be looking at this is a contract that gets renewed daily. And what do we each need to keep this contract renewing? And are we upholding our end of the contract? And are we willing to put our marriage on the line at times to keep our marriage healthy and growing? Or are we going to assume the marriage? It's almost like you can assume the marriage, but then you damage the relationship because now the relationship is less relevant than the marriage. Are we willing to say, the marriage is actually contingent on the relationship, and we need to prioritize the relationship to ensure that we both keep growing and that this marriage is a healthy, growth producing, productive space for both of us. I know this is an interesting take on it. So, something to think about. What would it be like to really consider in your own marriage, ending it, continuing it, and allowing yourself to be honest with where you're at in that process and be honest with your partner where you're at with that process so you both can understand what it would take to get to that true 100%, not an assumed path.